All right, here's a few news articles. This I thought was very nice to see sort of social science here where they put numbers on it. It's very clear to a lot of us that we're sliding into autocracy. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is the United States has not been a democracy for very long. We've been a republic, but we didn't actually let everybody vote, not until 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was passed. And so here's a measure of how closely we adhere to an ideal liberal democracy. And this took a big step up with the civil rights movement in the 60s. And in 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act, which for the first time made it illegal to stop people from voting, because after the Civil War and Lincoln was assassinated, they immediately reversed a lot of what had been done and blocked a lot of rights for Black people in the South. And they continue to do that to this day. But there was a big step improvement in 65, and Trump, of course, represents a giant leap backwards to return to the way things were before that. And there were some really important Supreme Court decisions that did this too. The most important being the Supreme Court released the states in the South from federal oversight. They used to be on a special blacklist where you people can't change any rules about voting without passing them to federal approval first, because they knew that they would immediately pass rules about voting to disenfranchise Black people. And a couple of years ago, they removed that. And immediately, the southern states started passing rules to make it more difficult for Black people to vote. And since they can't openly say it's against Black people, they just make it that you have to have a driver's license, but you can't get one if you're in a Black neighborhood easily. They make it you have to go someplace far away. They just pass a rule which puts some burden on the voters, which they know that the Black people have less chance of overcoming. And that is extremely effective. Anyway, so that's why we have the strange situation like Biden's maybe 8% ahead. That's true, but Democrats are greatly behind. There are many, many ways the system is not fair. And Hillary Clinton and many Democrats have demonstrated you can win the majority by quite a bit and still lose because the rules favor the Republicans. Anyway, so it's interesting to see a measure of this, and especially with Ruth Ginsburg's death, there's now a huge battle, because if Trump manages to put in another Supreme Court justice, then we will probably go back to the 50s for decades, as they'll have a solid conservative majority, unless, as I sort of hope, although maybe I'm foolish, I hope that the justices will not stick to party lines after they get in. The whole point is, since they have lifetime appointments, they don't have to keep obeying the person that put them in. But anyway, so Trump has been overriding medical data. So the US federal government issues official medical recommendations to his political liking, regardless of scientific truth, and often in a direct contradiction of scientific truth. And now the FBI director went before Congress and said that the Russians are influencing our election again. They are meddling, and we need to do something about it. And Trump is very, very, very sure about that. He never wants a word said against Putin or Russia. He never wants any suggestion that the Russians ever intervened in anything, or really that the Russians have ever done anything wrong at all, which is why a lot of people believe that he's basically under control of Putin. So he now says he may fire the Christopher Wray, the FBI director, for him daring to point out that the Russians are attacking us. We've totally been, a lot of why our nation is so divided and falling apart is part of a deliberate plan from decades ago where the Russians wanted to cause this, and they've been very successful at causing it to some extent, or at least amplifying it. And China and Russia both want to claim they have a vaccine just like Trump does, but in their society, they don't have anyone irritating like the CDC that has some independence left. So they just skipped phase 3 trials and announced them. Russia is now distributing it and China's now distributing it. They just don't bother to prove that it's safe and effective. You know, this is important in vaccines. You can make a vaccine and you can try it on, say, 100 people, and it seems to protect them. But what you don't know is that 1 in every 20,000 people has some horrible side effect and it kills them. And the only way to find out is to actually go through phase 3 trials, which take a large group of people and track them carefully. But that takes too long, and they've won the race. They're now distributing this stuff so people can take it, and you're just taking a chance. But they do get to brag that they had the vaccine first, and you can certainly do that. So now Trump wants to replace American education, which has largely been, since the civil rights movement, it has included discussions of the history of Americans around slavery and such, and he wants to get rid of that and replace it with the kind of propaganda that was around before that, saying America is the bastion of freedom, everybody loves it here. And of course, that's one side of it. A lot of people do well here and do find freedom here, but there's a whole bunch of people who are not included in that and who are oppressed. And it is, he wants to make it official government requirement that you teach the official government history propaganda, which is what happens in a lot of other nations, although not quite so much here, although there is a huge similar battle that goes on every year about whether to remove evolution from the school books and replace it with creationism. That's the main place where I see this. They're trying to do that all the time, and they do it in the more conservative states frequently, and then they're forced to come back. But anyway, he's going to try and encourage that. This is a fun talk from Ray Redacted about the history of hacking and phreaking, going all the way back to the beginning in the 50s and 60s. And it's really a lot of fun. I recommend checking that out if you're interested, talking about where it all came from MIT in the early days and all the stages it went through. And so a lot of people are in QAnon, a really large number of people. I think it's now up to 40 or 50% of Republicans say QAnon is pretty much a good thing and people should do it. And QAnon is, and the one thing people have said, which, I've been in religious cult groups, and I know it's just like a drug addiction. When people sink in, they can only come out very difficultly at the other end. I got out of it, but you can't get anybody out of it. They start believing this crazy stuff and they get more radicalized, just like people that are radical. It's basically religion, and they just believe crazy stuff, and it's all they want to think about and all they want to talk about. And when you argue with them, they just cut you off, even if you're family. So people have lost their parents, their brothers and sisters, it's broken up marriages and so on, just like any extreme religion, where you have to believe something repellent and often take appalling action. Now, they believe that they have to support Trump, they have to convince other people to do it, and maybe that they should be off, participating in militias or something, that everybody around them is part of an evil group with Satanism and drinking the blood of children and stuff. This has been around for centuries and millennia. This is especially attacking the children and attacking Jews. That seems to be a bestseller down through the generations. If you telling them the other guys are killing your children and that it's all the Jews doing it, will get a large number of people to believe that and support it. Somehow that's very popular. So TikTok, Trump says he's just going to ban TikTok unless they sell to an American company, which is crony capitalism at its worst. That is absolutely the opposite of a free market. It means the government controls the means of production. And if you want to have a company, the government has to approve it. And that means they have to get their cut that goes to their cronies who will donate back to the boss. This is just standard corruption where you have to bribe people to get things in. And I don't think he could actually get it through the courts, but he tried to pass it to the Oracle guy, who is very closely tied to Trump, but he tried to push through a fake proposal where he wouldn't actually own anything, and now they're trying to negotiate a deal. Other than that, TikTok will supposedly stop being available tomorrow, on Sunday, in America. And WeChat is apparently going down without a fight, which is real bad for Chinese Americans that need WeChat. I had to put WeChat on there just to visit China. Everybody uses WeChat for everything. You need WeChat if you're going to have anything to do with people in China. So blocking it in America would be a real disservice to them. But we'll see where this goes. So this is what I mentioned, the CDC. A few weeks ago, an official document was published on the coronavirus telling people that they didn't need to bother getting tests and removing the recommendation from states to have masks. And that was written by a Trump political guy with no credentials to do this, and just the CDC was forced to publish it on their website without any doctor consenting, without passing through the tests. So it even contains incorrect medical knowledge, incorrect medical terms. You can tell it was not written by a real doctor. And the head of the CDC seems to be pushing back. He went and testified before Congress saying a mask is more effective than a vaccine, and there's going to be no vaccine until late next year, because Trump wants to promise the vaccine will be here within like 1 month. And so the new revised guidance have come back, and this appears to be actually written by doctors and official CDC guidance. But what's very unclear is who controls the CDC and whether everything we're getting from them has been changed to be politically desired by Trump, or whether it actually reflects scientific evidence. So I think everyone is extremely suspicious of what kind of vaccine Trump is going to produce. I think a lot of us, probably including me, are just not even going to touch a vaccine until we have Biden in there. And if we have Trump in there, I don't know what I'm going to do, because he's corrupted the process like everything else, and I really don't trust him. This is what Biden said. He said, I trust the doctors like Fauci, but I really don't trust Trump. And I don't really trust this guy much either. This guy has let Trump get away with a lot, but he seems to have hit his limit. Trump is getting so outrageous that even this guy is pushing back. Anyway, so we're up to the official day here. All right, we're up to here. This is CNIT 160. And we're going to talk more about management. And then I've got at least one student presentation. If other people want to give an early presentation, let me know. But we'll talk about some more from chapter 3 and then see what presentations people have. And then some people want help setting up a virtual machines, which is fine. Anybody from any of my classes is welcome to come get help after we do the lecture for this official class. And I just answer any questions that come up. And if you haven't got your presentation ready, that's fine. Do it next week. You'll still be on time. After that, you'll lose some points for being late. All right, so here we are, information risk management, and we're in the second section, part of the risk management life cycle. So you've got a cyclical process where you determine what your risks are, you treat the risks in some way to get them down to an acceptable level, and then you measure how successful you've been and go around a loop, constantly improving. That's what's happening in this process. And it's all formally defined in policy. So you have a scope, which determines what part of the business you are trying to protect. And then you have these other parts of the cycle here. There are a lot of formal standards you could be following. You could also just invent your own and have to follow some sort of informal policy. But of course, as your company grows and becomes more important, then people will increasingly expect you to actually meet a standard. So they can say that they meet a standard by making sure that the people they work with do a standard. So if you start with a scope, you determine what part of the business we are going to try to control the risk of. Then you go down here, and so you have threats coming in. You figure out some kind of a vulnerability assessment or something. Or you get a warning that some threat actor group is attacking your business. Like you see these all the time in the news, in my news feed on Twitter from the FBI and many other groups they warn you health people are being attacked by these people in Korea or something. So you have some reason to worry about something. So you do a risk assessment. You say, well, how much is this going to harm us? How vulnerable are we at our company? Then you identify the risk, then you analyze it to figure out what assets are being attacked and whether it's okay to have that much risk. And then you have treatment, where you do whatever seems to be necessary to handle that risk. And then you assess to see how much risk there still is. And then you go around and around this loop. And as you go around, more threats advisories come in. So, and out of this come plans of action as part of the risk treatment, like changing your firewalls and your program settings and what companies you do business with and how you develop your software, all those things. So you define your scope, and this just talks about the same process. So risk analysis is trying to evaluate a risk. Now, if you watch the news and they say there's a new mosquito spreading a terrible disease, that's a threat. And that is where it might start, with a threat, but that's not a risk. A risk is where you analyze it down to how much harm will that really do us? How likely is it that that mosquito will bite us? How likely is it we'll get the disease? How many people would it affect? You know, that's when you get down to how likely is it? How much would it hurt us if it happened? What could be done about it? And then you can make a recommendation that we do something about it. And typically risk treatment is one of these 4 things. You either accept the risk, saying we have decided that this is not a big problem for us for whatever reason, and we're just not going to do anything about it. Or you mitigate the risk by putting in some kind of protection measure. Let me just close my windows. Get that noise out of here. There, that should be better. Anyway, you have some kind of prevention, like a firewall or an antivirus or something, or there's transfer, where you make it not my problem by, for example, buying insurance or perhaps outsourcing part of your business, where that stuff is done by some other company and therefore we aren't directly involved in that risk. Or you avoid the risk by changing your business process so you no longer do that risky activity at all. One common example I've seen there is years ago, 20 years ago, it's very common. Every time I would buy a product of any kind, it would come with a card to fill out saying, please register your product. And they went your name and address and phone number and everything, and they would send it to the company. And the company had this huge record of all their customers that they didn't really need. And then came privacy laws and everything. And one of the things they say is don't bother collecting data that you don't need. If I buy a toaster, they don't need to know who owns that toaster. They're not going to have updates and stuff. And it turns out it's probably more risk to the business to have that huge list of customers than whatever benefit you get from sending them advertisements for a new toaster or something. So that's the kind of thing. Just stop doing the thing that puts you at risk. And then there's communication. You have to inform various stakeholders about this. So here's risk avoidance, for example. That's happened again this year, I think. PG&E's lines are sitting unmaintained. Some of them are 100 years out of date. They're not secure enough to handle the voltage without falling down fairly now and then and shorting out and raining burning hot aluminum around. So what they do is they turn off the power when the winds are high so that if the lines fall, they won't start a fire. And that's risk avoidance. And this is really extreme. And risk avoidance is usually really extreme. They actually stop delivering power to customers who want the power, which is pretty outrageous from a business point of view, but they're lowering the risk of starting a fire by doing this, or at least so they hope. All right, and so you should have a risk register where you keep track of these risks and what you did about them, and then you can have a record of what you've done to guide your future decisions. So let's take a look at some Cahoots. Should be right here, 3B1. All right. All right. All right. I'll give it about 10 more seconds. All right. All right, what's the first step in the risk management life cycle? You determine the scope. There is a problem in all these things called scope creep, where you start doing something and then people say, oh, well, add this in and add this in and add this in. So you can't really get anywhere because you keep changing your mind about how big the area you're covering is. All right, what treatment is best if you have high probability and low impact? All right, you just accept it. Your employees might, for example, make unauthorized copies on the copier, and it's probably just not even worth the bother to try to prevent that in any serious way because it will do so little harm. All right. All right, so Dick's, the sporting goods store, decided to destroy their rifles instead of selling them. What risk treatment was this? They did this because there was a mass shooter and they bought the rifle at a store and people were mad at that store for selling rifles. And Dick said, you know, we don't want that. Let's just get out of the business of selling rifles. So we are not scandalized. People aren't mad at us for selling rifles. So that's risk avoidance. You just leave the business so you no longer do that activity. And now you don't have the risk of the consequences of that activity hurting you. All right, so what's a list of risk and treatments? Okay, that's a risk ledger. All right, so foo. I think that's a real name, more or less, a recognizable name. And player, will have to tell me who they are. Oh, I see. Okay, good. Good. All right, I got the name of player, so I think we're good. All right. So back to the slides. All right, so there are these official formal structures to guide you in organizing your risk management program. If you stick with the American Standard, the National Institute of Standards, there's 839, which is for the overall structure, and one of the documents for a piece of it is 830, which shows you how to perform a risk assessment, which is part of risk management. Then you got the international standard, the ISO standard, part of the 27,000 series, which is that big structure that might take years to set up, but then you've met a very high standard. There's another one called FAIR, which we talked about before. So here's the 839 American standard for risk management. And so it's got multiple levels. You've got an organization level, a business process level, and then an information systems level. And it's got a nice little chart here. So at the top is the management for the organization. Then you have business processes, and then you have IT systems. So you have, at the top, you'll have some overarching plan, like we are going to protect the data of our customers and obey all required regulations. That would be your statement from here. Then you pass down rules. They make decisions about how to perform business processes. The management here does. And then down here, you've got your IT people who now have to choose specific products. We're going to use this firewall, that method of encryption. We're going to use that cloud service, but not this cloud service over here. Those are the detailed tactical decisions of how you accomplish that. And then they measure to see how well are we actually achieving the goals. And that's your feedback, which goes up here through the levels so that the people at the top might choose to change some of their recommendations to keep up with changes or to improve your success at achieving your goals. So here's the top is the governance. The middle is enterprise architecture, making decisions about how you're going to do it in a general level. And at the bottom is the specific details, exactly what steps you're going to go through, exactly what products you're going to use, and so on. So you've got this risk management process, you have framing, then you assess your risk, then you respond to it, and then you monitor to see how well you have succeeded. All right, and in particular, the risk assessment part of that is in 830, and this is a standard methodology. It's very structured. You have a bunch of worksheets, many, many pages, listing all the threats and vulnerabilities, probabilities, and impact. So for example, to prepare for an assessment, you determine your scope, then the source of your information. You might, for example, subscribe to a threat actor information feed. There's a lot of those. And this must be NIST, not NIST. All right. And there are example lists there. So you conduct an assessment and you've got threats and sources. And here's some of the tables. They have threat source inputs, adversary intent, threat events, and so on. Then you determine your vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities and predisposing conditions, situations that mean some of those threats might actually get through your defenses and hurt you. And then you got the likelihood of occurrence. How likely is it that somebody would really attack us? For example, if you are a fairly harmless business, like a sporting goods business, then you might imagine that foreign nation states are not probably going to attack you with advanced persistent threats because you don't have any military data or classified data. And that would be the sort of thing. How likely is it that these people are going to attack us anyway? Then you figure out how likely is it really going to hurt us, and you figure out what's the real likelihood of us experiencing harm from that threat source. And then you determine the magnitude of the impact. How bad would it be if they got in? And there are various things here. You determine what assets you have and what's likely to get stolen. And then you determine the risk by putting it all together. You've got how likely it is that they're going to get in, how much harm it's going to do, and a template to guide you. It would be nice, in an ideal world, you'd like to have all this boiled down to, we're going to lose so many dollars per year from this threat, so we should spend this many dollars per year to stop it. But usually you can't get anywhere near that quantitative. You just have sort of high, medium, and low. All right, and then you communicate results to your management and such, and then you assess your environment to see if you still have those risk factors. There's always some residual risk. There's nothing you can buy or build that will take your risk down to zero. So you have to measure it and see if the risk is now down to an acceptable level. The international standard is just a different way of accomplishing the same thing, of course. So you establish the context with the scope, your criteria for measurement, then how much you're going to accept, and then you make a plan to lower the risks down to an acceptable level. So you have to identify the assets, identify the threats, and the possible controls that you could use, and your vulnerabilities, and then you can determine the consequences of doing business under these conditions. So you evaluate your risk, then you have the treatments, same old thing. You can mitigate the risk by putting in some kind of control like a firewall that will stop something. You can accept the risk. You can avoid doing that risky activity entirely, or you can transfer the risk to some other organization. But whatever you do, after risk treatment, there is always residual risk left. Nothing can ever get it down to zero. And then you have a lot of communication. You inform people in your company of these risk assessments. You have discussions to determine your risk tolerance. You got educational information like security awareness training. This is part of preventing your employees from making so many mistakes. And you have to communicate about security incidents. You have to do breach notification to sometimes the public, sometimes regulatory agencies, sometimes just your own help desk and employees and things like that. And then you got monitoring review. You got to determine if you have new assets. People attach new servers and new business partners to your company, and you have to determine how that changes your risk profile. There's threats are constantly changing. Products have an endless chain of new vulnerabilities that you have to address. And your security incidents may alter your understanding. This is what people have told me when I've tried warning people about their security problems. The professional has said, don't even bother talking to people until they get hacked. Nobody will care until they get hacked once. And when they get hacked and it really hurts them, then they're more ready to listen. But usually until then, they say, oh, it will never happen to us. There aren't very many people that haven't been hacked, though. Even like 3 years ago, there was a survey, and something like 80% of executives surveyed said that they did get hacked within the last 12 months in a way that was so bad that it harmed their business. So I don't think there's very many people left who pretend it won't happen to them. It's happening to everybody all the time. So FAIR is another system that accomplishes essentially the same thing. You have 6 types of loss. You might lose productivity. This is a huge one with ransomware. Hospitals get hit with ransomware. Now they can't do their business. So you can't accomplish anything for a while. And there's other things here. You might have fines and judgment. You might have reputation damage. Maybe your customers will get disgusted and go to some other provider because they feel like you are incompetent and unsafe because you let yourself get hacked. I don't see much of that. Businesses like TJ Maxx get hacked and their stock doesn't fall for more than a day and they just roll on, because I think most people have just got the attitude that as far as we can tell, everybody gets hacked. There's no reason to believe that the other business is not going to get hacked. In fact, I often feel better about a business that has been hacked because now they probably implemented some controls. But anyway, at some point, you do lose your reputation when you're caught doing things that are too bad. And so here's ways a threat agent can act on you. They might access information. They might misuse the information. They might leak it, they might modify it, or they might just deny its use to authorized parties, and all of those are different kinds of attacks. For a while, until about a year ago, people said that ransomware was really a pretty small attack in the sense that all they did was modify files, and if you paid the ransom and got the key and decrypted them, you did not have to do breach disclosure because they never stole the data. That was a fairly common belief, to the extent that where Uber tried to cover a major thing, they're claiming they were going to treat this as a bug bounty. But they lost in court and got punished for that. And in fact, I hear a lot these days about ransomware that when they in fact infect your system and encrypt the files, they also steal a copy and then they threaten to leak it. So it is a breach. They are stealing the data in addition to destroying the data. So they're doing, access and modify and deny use here all at once, which is very common. Very few threats really fit neatly in one category. Anyway, so let's take a look at the 3B cahoots. All right. All right. We're up to 6. Good. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. All right. What's the first step in the risk management life cycle? Wait, did we already do this one? No. Okay. Wait. Wait, I don't think this is right. This is the old one. I did the wrong one somehow. All right, what's the deal? 3B2. This should be the right one. All right, what's going on? See if this one's different. All right, there's the people. We better see different questions here. Okay, the US government standards for risk assessment. Now these are the right ones. Of course, the NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards. That's the US government system. And 39 is not risk assessments, however. It's something bigger. All right. And what's the standard with 6 types of loss? That was fair, had that property. Good. All right. And what's the US standard for risk management? That's it, 39. Everybody was trying for that last time. Good. All right. And which standard uses organization, mission, and information systems views? That was 839 again with that triangular diagram. All right, probably the most important for Americans. All right, so I got VU again. And drawing 2 again. And risk, who is probably the same as before, I don't know. Yep, I'm gonna assume, yep, that's what I thought. Good, all right. So, good. So let me stop this recording and I'll make a separate recording if people want to have their presentations recorded.